Hello and welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piscor.
And I'm Tom Scioli.
And we are very excited to sit down with cartoonist Tom Scioli to talk about I Am Stan, your, shall I say, follow-up to your Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of Jack Kirby book, and now you're doing I Am Stan, the story of Stan Lee. Often the two are laced together throughout history. What led you to do a Stan Lee book? It seems like originally you were a Kirby guy.
Yeah, I mean, but all that is kind of immaterial. You know what I mean? Like when you're making a book, it's like, where's this line of thought leading me? And Stan Lee, like when I was making the Jack Kirby book, Stan Lee was kind of like this force of nature. Like he almost kind of like threatened to take over the book. You're making a comic. It's cartooned. And Stan Lee had already sort of, in real life, turned himself into a cartoon character, And so when he shows up in that environment, it kind of sucks up all the oxygen. And so that was something, as I was making the book, it's like, oh, God, how does he not become like Fonzie? How does it not become like, oh, I want to follow this guy around. I want to see what this guy's up to. So it naturally makes sense that, like, when you do your spin-off, Fonzie gets the spin-off,
Let me ask you this. We looked at Alan Moore's masterclass recently, and one of the things that he talks about is you've got to be able to empathize with the various characters. Otherwise, you get a flat character. Do you empathize with Stan Lee? Do you identify with Stan Lee?
So much. Like, I feel like we all have our Jack Kirby side, and our Jack Kirby side is probably, like, very developed because we're, like, sitting down doing the drawing. But we also have a Stan Lee side, and I feel like, doing YouTube and stuff like that, it kind of... Your Stan Lee side starting to get nurtured a little bit too.
I see that blazer.
Exactly. It's getting kind of like, like Jekyll and Hyde in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where it's like, oh, Mr. Hyde used to be shorter than me, and now he's this giant, and I'm, so yeah. I empathize with him so much, and the thing that really put it over the top as like Stan, as somebody I could actually sit down and spend a lot of time, like a year at the least, in his world and in his head, is just the nature of his last days. Stan Lee is somebody who you could understand people kind of being envious of, like, oh, I wish I had Stan Lee's life. But having seen the whole story, I don't think anybody wishes they were Stan Lee. Like his last days were just so sobering to me. So like so much of my empathy for him kind of is cemented there. But of course, like Stan Lee was like, he was my introduction to like, oh yeah, comics are made by real people. Like Stan Lee was the first one. Like he, and he's in there. He's in my sort of, child's mentality, like watching those Amazing Spider-Man cartoons. He's the narrator. It's like, this is, and so then any disappointment that a lot of us have with Stan Lee as we grew up was just learning the real story of, of like, oh wait, this guy I had set up here is actually not way up here. He's, somewhere less than that. And so then it's the fall from that height that brings about the disappointment. But as you get older, you kind of just like, your empathy in general just grows. But yeah, like I have so much empathy for Stan Lee, and there's so much to like there too.
There was a lot of stuff in the news at that sort of end period, and you kind of bookend, the narrative with that end period stuff. So talk about that period, because I think another name for the fanboy in comics could be the like idolater. Mm-hmm. It's going to kick a little dust on these people's kind of false idols and things.
I mean that, like, you talk about news, and like when you think of news, you think of like tuning Channel 11 or something and seeing like the news anchor. But it's like we're in this phase where we're getting information from really like from sideways, where it's like, oh, you see like maybe like somebody posting something somewhere and you're not sure what it like it was. So like with that Stan Lee thing, it was kind of like the first thing I remember just really experiencing in this like new media landscape, where it's like it wasn't like something I saw on the nightly news or read in an article. It was like it's like this weird like link, this YouTube, and you just see that video of Stan at a convention, falling and all that. So it's like you're just getting all this like disconnected, very concerning.
Well, that piece right there,
yeah.
that you open the book with that,
yeah,
and that is not up for interpretation.
Sure, yeah.
He's there signing books, and some douchebags off the camera are spelling his name for him, and the juxtaposition of that like is a very sad notion, because it is like he is fully out of it. Like they sort of, wound him up in the back to like do this thing, and he can't even spell his own name. Like there's no, what's the interpretation? Like that's legit.
Yeah, and like my whole life with Stan Lee as this, person, this I guess you'd call it like a parasocial relationship, like this person who's been in my life since I was a child. That is the lasting image for me. Is this like when I think of Stan Lee, I don't think of Spider-Man. Like I think of that. I think of him at that show. So it is like,
Yeah, let's talk about. We were there when you met Stan one time.
Yeah, you guys were there. Yeah.
On the ride down to Heroes that year, I believe the first Avengers was out, and a topic of conversation you would bring up is like, you know what, Marvel's not getting any money from me in the theaters. I'm not watching any of these movies, man, for what they did to Jack, all this, yada yada yada. We were going back home, and like the trick is you leave a couple of minutes early from the convention because you could get the elevator before everybody else. That's the move.
Yeah.
And we were there, and out comes Stan Lee, and I don't even think I saw feet touch the ground.
Yeah.
Like you just kind of just kind of hovered over to him, and like, Stan Lee, and shook hands and had a moment. So explain that. Man.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about hovering, like, because my memory of it involves hovering too, and it was like I was coming from the outside, and again doing the thing, and I think you guys had already made it to the hotel room.
Oh no, I witnessed this. I was right there.
Okay, well, I'm gonna. This may again multiple books, multiple points of views. I'll tell you my point of view, and obviously it may conflict with yours. That's the nature of memory, but I remember being outside, walking towards the hotel, and then as I'm going in there, there's Stan Lee and one of his handlers, and that he almost like danced up the stairs like Fred Astaire, doing this like sideways sidestep. Again, the memory. But wearing this like white suit, might have been off-white, might have been cream, but dressed all in white, kind of like luminous, kind of like, lighter than air, waltzing up the stairs, and then I'm at the elevator, and I'm supposed to go like I'm gonna go up to the room and refresh or whatever, and see you guys or whatever. So my memory is you guys are already up in the room, and then we're waiting for the elevator, and I'm talking to Stan Lee, shake hands, we talk and stuff, and then the elevator door opens, and then you guys come out, and just sort of a coincidence, because like we all are gonna go to the same place next, so it's kind of perfect. We're all there at the same time. So that's
Jimmy, you're the tie-breaking vote, man. What happened? What happened that day?
I have a terrible memory. I have no memory of Tom and Stan Lee. I definitely wasn't there. I may have been sleeping in the room.
Well, no, because then you guys came down. There might have been one or two, like maybe Ben Mara or something.
I remember Ben Mara.
One or two other guys might have been there too, and then after that, the whole talk was like, "Oh, you talked to Stan. Well, what'd you guys talk about? What'd you do? What'd you do that?" And I don't quite remember the particulars of the conversation. I remember telling him that I was a big fan, and then he said some kind of like funny thing in response. Probably something he's said a million times, or maybe just something that came up in the moment. But we had like a nice little talk, and then yeah, that was that, and that was
It's a very memorable elevator. I feel like from Karl Rove to Stan Lee,
right,
a lot of stories in
that
that
might have been
elevator.
that might have been the same
Could
year
have been
too.
the same year, man. And then I felt like I got the short end of the stick.
If you think about it, like Heroes Con right around that time might have been like the center of the universe when you think of like where everybody's gone since then. Us, Stan Lee, Karl Rove,
Tom, I wanted to talk research a little bit on this.
Yeah.
Because Stan is so well chronicled.
Yes.
So many people worked with him. So did you find anything very surprising in your research? Did you talk to people that had a lot of firsthand accounts of working with Stan?
Yeah, it's like Stan. It's kind of like I already had a Stan Lee life story already figured. You know what I mean? Like and when you do this kind of project, it's like, okay, I have my Stan Lee life story figured out. And then it's like, okay, well, now let me go fact check that.
Yeah.
So then you go down that hole and you're like, okay, that thing that I think happened with Stan Lee, let me double check and see where I got that from and if it lines up. And then that kind of leads you on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And so yeah,
the editors do some work in the book up front to kind of give like that preface, like this is not authorized by the Stan Lee estate or Marvel Comics or anything like that. So you cover your bases that way, and then at the end there's bibliographies and links and pieces about what podcast this might be from, or
you're right,
this article, that article.
Like with compared to the Jack Kirby thing, there is a lot of like Jack Kirby, there's a lot of interviews with him and a lot of really substantive interviews too. And then there's a little bit of video. But with Stan, it's like so documented. Like you can watch Stan Lee on TV from like, you know, the 60s till, you know, not too long before his death. You know, there's video. So it's like just an amazing, there's just so much there. And I feel like, you know, it really is just a matter of like omission, of like editing, of like what do you include and what, because yeah, very well documented. The interesting thing, like I feel like Stan Lee's interviews were never as substantive as the Jack Kirby ones.
It's kayfabe.
Yes.
And you, let's talk a little formal stuff, man. Like, because you clearly have grown since the Kirby book. And one of the pages that jumps out to my mind is a very early page. I think you might have even shown that online, where he's telling the same old story that we heard 5,000 times, and you used almost like a Warhol approach to maybe even show the evolution of Stan Lee grow. You know, the full Funky Flashman stuff, man, from like early Stan Lee to, you know, Stan Lee with the helmet, with the sunglasses and all that stuff, man. And it's like a 9-panel grid. You play with color. And it's it's the story we all know. You all heard, I was going to quit. And my wife told me to, like, that whole bit. And there's some formal stuff happening. From Kirby to this point, there's some Cro-Magnon stage involved here to get you from there to the Stan Lee book, because there's so much growth that has happened. That is, I think this is a masterpiece comic.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I've done hundreds of pages of comics since the Jack Kirby book, and you know, hardly any of it's seen print. A lot of it I've shared like on Instagram and on my Patreon and stuff. But I've done, like, there is a lot of artistic growth that's happened since then. So it's natural, and that's why it was kind of important to me. Like even during like times where I maybe didn't have a job lined up, I didn't want to just sit and let my skills languish.
Cartoonists don't do that.
Exactly. I wanted to keep sharpening the sword, get ready for when you get that call, and then you're ready to go. So, like if you look at the stuff that I've been doing the past couple years and like through the pandemic and stuff, the Stan Lee stuff evolved like straight out of that, and it was like I was trying to. It's like kind of a reading experience I've been trying to create for a really long time, trying to make comics where there is no obstacle to the reading experience, where like the reading experience is purely pleasurable, like, you know,
that's how manga works.
Like manga, yeah, and I've been reading a lot of manga and stuff, but it's just like, you know, sometimes you do comics that are, you know, you have these like clever ideas and stuff, but this time I wanted to just make it just so accessible and just so immediate, and so yeah, it is a very different reading experience, and Stan's a different guy than Jack Kirby too, so it makes sense, you know.
That's a conversation, man, because now we could talk like a little of the Rashomon part, where you need both books. You need the Kirby book, you need the Stan Lee book, because you do see the same scenes happening in both books, but it's that exact thing that Frank Miller would talk about with Dark Knight Returns, where if this was a Superman book, Batman would be the villain, and I would portray him as such.
Yeah.
So the ocarina scene comes to mind, where in the Kirby book, through his interviews with Gary Groth and stuff, I think we even have a video where we dissect that interview. He's talking about this young fucking nepo baby who's coming into their office like playing an ocarina, which who knew those even existed beyond Legend of Zelda, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you make him a big doofus dancing on tables and stuff. And in the Stan Lee book, that same moment happens, and all the same stuff happens. Even Kirby is like, this fucking annoying kid, but you play it a little more straight. So there's all those choices that come into play, which is a fascinating piece of editing that is the invisible stuff on the page. Yeah,
I mean, point of view is important, and like especially in comics, like there's so much you can do with point of view and stuff, and the you know, I tried to be as factual as possible with both of these books, but the gray areas are huge.
Sure.
So there's a lot of that, and they're both subjective narratives too. So like the Jack Kirby book is, like you said, so much like from Jack Kirby's point of view, and I think like, you know, the artwork reflects that and stuff, and then the Stan too. So it's like just looking at Jack Kirby in the Jack Kirby book, where it's kind of like from his point of view, and we're in his head and in his world, and the way Jack Kirby looks, the way he interacts with that world. And then you see Jack Kirby show up in the Stan Lee book, and it's not the internal Jack Kirby, it's the external Jack Kirby. It's what Jack Kirby looked like to young Stan Lee, where it's like Jack Kirby is like, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 years older than Stan. The age difference isn't that huge, but he's an old pro, and I'm the office boy. I'm the guy who gets sandwiches,
It's so interesting to think about that in terms of the writing, as you were saying, Ed, where it's like it's very readable, this Stan Lee book, in a way that's different than the Kirby book. And I never thought about it till this moment, but it's great because the Kirby book does reflect the artist and how he told stories versus Stan Lee and that silver tongue. It just makes it so easy to read. And you mentioned manga as being a very easy read. What you're doing is a totally different approach, though.
Yeah.
I don't want people to expect this to be the manga biography of Stan Lee, because I think you're doing something else that I can't think of another comic that does it. And I'll describe it as like each page pretty much as a scene, which is incredible.
It's a unit,
and it's mostly all told through dialogue. It might all be told through dialogue. I'm trying to think if there was a moment or two that wasn't.
And the time stuff is great because you're capturing the career, and there are things visually that you can point to suggest the time. It is Stan's receding hairline.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a timeline.
Absolutely. Like when he's trying on the different toupees and shit, and when he creates his funky Flashman type persona. One of the pieces that I thought was really, really smart was the evolution. Like you could tell time by looking at, you had an exterior shot of like the Marvel offices from the earliest days, like throughout, Atlas, Timely, Marvel, and then it just gets to be a bigger and bigger kind of skyscraper, or, we know it is a section in that giant skyscraper, but the implicit image makes it feel like, okay, Marvel's just growing and stuff like so like there are these, it's really smart visual language stuff that you're putting in there so that you don't even have to put December 1966, or none of that is in there.
Well, I mean, again, just trying to make a direct experience. And how many movies do you watch where it's like, 1967, or a voiceover saying, and then Stan moved, so it's like, if you're watching a movie, you're just taking it all in, and it's up to you and to kind of put all the pieces together. And you shouldn't, again, that's a choice. I've done comics where I do play into that, like G.I. Joe or something, where it's like, there's like a new, like title every page, or sometimes multiple panels. The title, playing with those aspects. But again, this time I've done all kinds of different comics. I wanted to get out of the way, it's so appropriate for Stan. Snappy patter, So like if you were doing a direct translation of like a Stan Lee comic book, it would have overbearing narration, overbearing dialogue. But it's like, I'm not doing a Stan Lee. A comic book that Stan Lee would make. I'm doing Stan Lee, the guy, as a comic. So it's going to be breezy, likable, affable, fast-moving, funny, so capturing that,
The videos are brought to you by the books that we make, but the videos are also sustained by the Patreon support at our various levels. You can hit the description in below this video to see what could suit your needs, and depending on your level of support, you're seeing us record our entire sessions before anybody else, and you're getting videos before anybody else does. Completely mitigates the kayfabe effect, but we do have books out in the wild and books that are forthcoming. Jimmy, what do you have?
Hulk Grand Design, Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, and The Plain Janes are all of my books that are in print and available now. My next book, Street Angel, Princess of Poverty, will be out in May from Image Comics. You can start pre-ordering that now. It's completely different comics than Deadliest Girl Alive, and will complete the Street Angel set.
Fantastic, man. Coming in May, Red Room Crypto Killers issue 1. Printed up the cover right there, man. That's your regular cover. You guys have been asking about sketch covers, so we're going to put one of those out for Red Room Crypto Killers issue number 1, coming out in May. There are 2 existing trade paperbacks of that out there. Here's the cover for issue 2. Your store might be able to offer you that one right now. A lot of people have been asking, man, is Jimmy going to do a variant for issue 1? Let me show you guys just a little glimpse of Jimmy's cover, man. We'll announce that at a later date, but some of you guys know what that is, man. 2 existing trade paperbacks of Red Room out there right now. Antisocial Network and Trigger Warnings. 4 volumes, Hip Hop Family Tree, celebrating its 10-year anniversary. Hit my link in the description below, man. Like, I got an announcement about that in the not too far future. 3 volumes, X-Men Grand Design and WYSIWYG, are out there in the wild right now. We thank you guys so much for supporting our books. We thank you so much for supporting the channel through the Patreon.
Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to see how people receive the book, because we're comic fans. Like, we know we have our own versions of Stan Lee's biography in our heads, going into this thing. I think it will appeal to a wider audience, because you take cartoon Stan Lee and you basically show us Stan Lee as a person, his family, his stuff outside of maybe what we think of as his nepotistic advantages and things like that. And that's super rich, and I think that that's not represented a lot. Like, it feels literary to me to watch this guy suffer, grow old, have ups and downs in his career. A lot of the stuff that, like, Stan was guarded in interviews. Like, that's not the stuff we were going to get. We were going to get Disney's Marvel, it was going to be great, and it was going to be sales. And what we're seeing is more of a portrait of a person, which is amazing, because it's Stan Lee.
And it's ballsy to do that. Once again, because of the idolaters who, like, worship at the altar of Stan Lee. They want that rosy picture. They want the kayfabe, but you are showing these other angles.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like, maybe I'm stupid or something, but like, like, that kind of stuff doesn't scare me. Like, like stepping into, and I, maybe because, like, where I am in my life, where we are in our lives, it's like, I've been sort of hardened. I've had Transformers fans give me shit. I've had Jack Kirby fans give me shit. I mean, the Stan Lee thing's going to be a different scale, but
the hierarchy of needs is met. You got people who fucking love you. The bills are paid. Like, all the real shit is cool, and whatever anybody says.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Like, I am
just fuck them.
I'm so much better, like, armed for any kind of reaction in general. Like, I also feel that the way that everything gets uniformly shit on these days is actually really helpful, because then it's like nothing.
It's white noise.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
As soon as people start to try to cancel Jack Kirby for his transgressions, it's like, okay, they've hit the limit. It's over. Like, just ignore them. It's the same people crying about the same stuff.
Yeah, right.
So I believe this book can be sold outside of comics. I think the people that are just interested in pop culture and history, and I mean, you think of how big the MCU is beyond the comic book shops, I think there'd be interest for anybody. If you read historical biographies, I'm saying this is a book for you, or for that person in your life that reads those things.
Yeah, perfect gift for the comics person in your life.
Does the visuals are unique to me. I can't think of another comic that looks like it. Can you think of any? Were there any that you look at and think, yeah, there's some visuals I stole from here or there? Because I love that it looks different. It's amazing.
It looks like very different from anything I've ever done. Like, it's a completely different thing. I mean, I guess, like, what I would think is, like, if Hank Ketchum were doing Dennis the Menace, but with Frank Miller Ronin layouts. That's how you get here.
I love that you say that, man. My head is in that space right now. The other cool thing about this comic is it is a history of mainstream comics, like using Stan Lee as just kind of a cipher, because we're hitting all aspects of it, down to the part where, yes, the comics men were not happy in that position. It was not like a position of high esteem. So you have this little glimmers of Stan trying to make it in the comic strip space, and you capture, you do play the hits. So there is the Stan Lee stuff where he's at the cocktail party, and is the way you do it as a strip is so fantastic. And I don't know that anybody could have done it better, where he's kind of skirting around what the job really is. Oh, I work in publishing. Oh, what is it? Like we've heard that story from him a million times, and you can interpret that any number of ways in a comic book page. But I think you fucking nail it. You nail all the hits. As I'm reading it with the information that I know, it's like, okay, man, now we have Joe Maneely. Like, when is the Joe Maneely tragedy going to happen? And like, what kind of attention does that get? Boom, we get that. And like, it's all in here.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are some things that are like so important to, like, I guess, like the fandom or the comics culture or the cult of personality of Stan.
Yeah, the legend.
Yeah, and so and then you also balance that against stuff that's like maybe, the comics history or whatever doesn't, it doesn't merit as much of a mention, but it's like is so important to Stan. So like that stuff's in there too. So
It's definitely, yeah, I don't want to give the message that this isn't for comics fans because
Yeah.
it's very
Right,
rewarding
sure,
as a
yeah.
comic book nerd. I love like seeing Wally Wood come in and we get to see Wally Wood on Daredevil with Stan,
Yeah.
some back and forth there that as a comics history fan, love it.
See that episode of Cartoonist?
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes, like, I've been working on this thing for a while, and sometimes be over here and we'd be doing a video and we'd be talking about stuff that was like, oh yeah, that was on my drawing board, or that, or I'm about to draw that, or what, you know. So it was all like very fresh.
There's
for me.
great stuff with media too. Like there's a sequence whenever he's selling the Hulk to Hollywood, and
Yeah.
I loved seeing that. You know, coming off a Hulk Grand Design, like that was something I looked up. It was cool to hear that description. But even like trying to get Spider-Man on the screen, it's so rich. Whatever your connection to Stan Lee is, I feel like you're addressing it in this book.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could almost like the title could almost be like, you know, for one audience, you could create a different cup, maybe like a slip cover that's like the man behind the Marvel cameos, you know, for people who've never opened a comic book, but you know,
Absolutely.
you know, because there are so many entry points for Stan, and it is so interesting approaching his life because he lived for such a long time and he was so active in all these areas, and yet his great artistic moment, his great creative moment, like the moment that you know he's still celebrated for, is that sort of narrow window of like 60s Marvel, and that like those are the things that sort of stand the test of time. But when you look at his life, there's so much that was going on in his life before that, so much, and then this like when they say there's no second acts in American lives, like Stan had second acts, third acts, fourth, like it just kept going and going. You know, he's TV producer.
The name equity became like a viable, valuable brand that people were attaching that fucking name to a million things, man. The Neil Adams hockey team shit, or was it football? Was it hockey, football? One of those.
There's like a hollowing out that happens too. Like it's interesting, like that. You know, navigating that space too, where it's like, okay, you are a brand now, and like this increasing, like your willingness to hollow yourself out, and people, you know, and people having their worldviews, their views of what you are, and then this temptation to like play into it, or you know,
creating the kayfabe, Stan Lee as icon. Some stuff is just kind of like lost to history, and there's definitely elements that I was completely unaware of. Two things come to mind. Him with the whip, which I saw the Al Jaffe Christmas card or whatever, where Stan Lee being Santa Claus, and that just seemed like a jolly joke. It's Al Jaffe, the mad guy, doing some caricaturing, but having a CCTV camera installed in an office like in the 60s or 50s or something. I mean, what is that, $20,000 of infrastructure to make that kind of thing happen? Where did you discover that? And tell the people a little bit about that.
You know, there's a point in like when like comics are this huge media like where they are mainstream, and they, you know, in like, you know, the 40s and stuff, where it's like this huge business, and like cash is just coming in, you know, in barrels, you know, at that point. And so and there is this era, it's like the post-war Stan Lee had this like moment in his like 20s where it's like after World War II he came back, and all his worst qualities he became like l'enfant terrible, like he like it, and it is this period, and you can tell he kind of, it was like a fever, and then it broke and he got over it, and like elements of that were there before, elements were there after, but it was like at its worst, and he becomes, and so you would hear the stories of guys at that time when there really was a Marvel bullpen, like it, you know, it wasn't called Marvel, but it was like there were in-house guys, and you'd have like the Al Jaffes, you'd have
Vince Fago,
the whole crew, and it was the thing, like, you know, there's these different like Stan Lee documentaries and stuff, and like I would hear this story about, oh, Stan would come in with a whip and he'd start whip, and like I'm thinking it's like metaphorical and stuff, but then like I found like a couple different accounts. I think John Buscema is one, like John Buscema I think is the one who tells the story on camera, but that he's like, Stan would come in with a whip and he would start whipping us, and it's a joke, but meanwhile you're like whipping these like tough Italian guys, and so I'm just trying to imagine like what the reality is, because like here I whip, but it's like you're actually and like he was saying, it hurt, like, you know, he's whipping, and it's like, come on dude, you know what's, you know, so like that, and it was all just, and so the Al Jaffe thing, it's like, of course there's like some joke in there, but it's not like, because I think he had like some like an axe or like some spikes and stuff in there, but like the whip was a real thing. He had a whip. He would whip guys. He would sit on top of the cabinet and make everybody bow to him. And you'd hear these stories from multiple people. And yeah, the one, like for me, where it first came on my radar was like years and years and years ago, was Kurtzman's wife, who was like the second, like they met at like, Atlas or Timely or whatever, early Marvel. And like she was the one who had a lot of the sort, because she like didn't give a shit, so she was the one who like sort of spilled the beans on all that kind of stuff, and then like other people kind of chimed in after there. But it like you would think like, oh, this Stan Lee is a monster, but it's not. Like he wasn't doing that stuff in the 70s. He like, it was just brief, like post-war, probably like all bottled up. From being like I mean, he didn't go overseas or anything, but he was still in the military. Like there was some kind of like discipline and structure that was probably very tough for a guy like him, who seems to have an excess of nervous energy.
The color's very unique. Were you looking at anything specific for your color palette?
I mean, I've basically been using variations on the same color palette for like since American Barbarian. I've just been kind of picking and choosing, but I wanted to have like minimal, like as little color as I could do, and kind of, and I even played with the idea of like just kind of like leaving, the faces and hands and stuff completely uncolored. So I did end up coloring them somewhat, but not it. There's not the, and there's a lot of open space too. There's a lot of open panels. So I just wanted, breezy, light on its feet.
That open space makes it a more inviting read.
Yeah, sure.
It's not overly dense, as a result. My last question, maybe, is I'm curious about the actual writing process, because by having each page be more or less a contained scene, were you like moving pages, moving things around? What was the writing process?
Yeah, I mean, that was a like conscious thought at the very beginning. Was I wanted to approach it a little bit like film, and I wanted to be able to have lots of options in terms of editing and moving things around and moving them here and there. And so that was just like a really good way, like, other reasons too, but that was a really good solution to that. If you make them sort of these isolate, so then your unit is the page, but then you have options to move things as much. And early on in the process, I did have the idea of maybe doing like a Slaughterhouse-5, like a completely unstuck from time kind of narrative. Now, as it evolved, it just like having a more or less chronological order just kind of like, yeah, no, this is working. And so I didn't have to do too much of that, it's largely in the framing sequence and then maybe a little bit here and there playing with time. But it was like there was a lot of moving the puzzle pieces around, and which is great on a work that it's not like it's coming out in installments every month. Like I'm working on the whole thing as I'm working on each individual bit. So, it was a very natural process of moving these pieces around.
Did you work out of sequence on some of the stuff?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I had a couple key things here and there. And then when I was doing like the early years, I was kind of doing those more or less in sequence. But then when we start getting closer to the Marvel years, then I was kind of like, I just sort of wake up in the morning and be like, okay, I want to do, Stan Lee at like the Marvel animation in the like Marvel Studios in the 80s. I want to do that one today. So then kind of get in that headspace and figure that out. So I jumped around a lot, like around that point.
Good way to keep enthused.
Yeah, for
sure. Yes, yeah.
The material.
You're an important part of the process. Like let's not completely discount the guy who's actually got to sit down and make this thing. You know?
Yeah. So it's like the function of like the fight scene or something like that. Like get the cool moment in there, get the juice up, and then go back and do, a Mama's Boy strip.
Yeah, right.
Of which are a couple of great ones. So let's talk data, facts, salesmanship, man. How many pages? When is this thing coming out? What's the price point thereabouts?
The narrative is like, I mean, the book itself is like, over 200 pages or whatever. And then there's going to be a free comic book day version on Free Comic Book Day, which I think is May 6th. It's like that Saturday. And it's going to be like an excerpt of the book. It's a really juicy excerpt. Like I feel like it's like a big chunk of what a lot of people are going to be coming here to see. It's like a big chunk of like the Marvel years.
That's the stuff to put in there for sure.
Exactly. It's going to people like that's what you're looking for. It also kind of gives you a like you're going to know if you're on board with this book from that stuff. Like that's it's a good litmus test or whatever. So we're putting the best foot forward, which is always how I think about with Free Comic Book Day. Just like show us your best, because you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on it. And then the book itself is going to come out in September, and they're also releasing Jack Kirby: The Epic Life of the King of Comics in soft cover as sort of like we said, the companion piece to this, and that's going to be in September. And then Comic-Con, which I think is like the month before in August, it's going to be sort of an early release of the book there in limited quantities.
Super cool, man. Tom, it's been a while since we had you on the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel, man. Thank you so much for stopping by. Now that people know why you haven't been on the channel for a while, man.
Yeah.
Heck of a book. Thank you for stopping by.
And thanks for making the book, man.
Yeah.
What a pleasure to read.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you guys liked it.